Content warning for Chapter 3. This chapter contains a word that may be hurtful or offensive to the Romani people, as well as period-typical fat phobia. Listen at your own risk. Hi, I'm Morgan, and today I'm excited to read to you from Grace Harlowe's junior year at high school, which was written by a woman named Josephine Chase, who went by the pseudonym Jessie Graham Flower. Chapter 3, An Autumn Walking Expedition. "It is simply too lovely to go home today," exclaimed Grace Harlowe to her three chums as they strolled down High School Street one sunny afternoon in early October. "I move that we drop our books at my house and go for a walk." "I'm willing to drop my books anywhere and never see them again," grumbled Nora O'Malley, who was not fond of study. "I ought to go straight home," demurred Anne Pearson, "but I'll put pleasure before duty and stay with the crowd." "What about you, Jessica?" asked Grace. "You couldn't drive me home," replied Jessica promptly. "Very well," laughed Grace. "As we were all of the same mind, let's shed these books and be off." After a brief stop at Grace's home, the four girls started out, keenly alive to the beauty of the day. The leaves on the trees were beginning to lose their green and put on their dresses of red and gold. Though the sun shone brightly, the air was cool and bracing and filled one with that vigor and joy of living which makes autumn the most delightful season of the year. Once outside the gate, the chums unconsciously headed in the same direction. "I believe we all have the same place in mind," laughed Grace. "I was thinking about a walk to the old omnibus house." "Great minds run in the same channel," quoted Jessica. "I haven't been out there since the spread last year," said Anne. "I have," said Grace with a slight shudder. "I'm not likely to forget it either." "Well, we're not apt to meet any more Napoleon Bonapartes out there," said Nora, referring to Grace's encounter with an escaped lunatic, fully narrated in Grace Harlowe's sophomore year at high school. They were nearing their destination when Anne suddenly exclaimed, "Look, girls, someone is over at the old house. I just saw a man go around the corner." The girls looked quickly in the direction of the house. Just then a figure appeared, stared at the approaching girls, and began waving his hat wildly, at the same time doing a sort of war dance. "It's another lunatic!" screamed Jessica. "Run, girls, run!" "Run nothing!" exclaimed Nora. "Don't you know Reddy Brooks when you see him? Just wait until I get near enough to tell him that you mistook him for a lunatic." "Hurrah! David and Hippie are with him." Well, exclaimed Hippie as the girls approached. "Here is Mrs. Harlowe's little girl and some of her juvenile friends. I'm very glad to see so many Oakdale children out today." "How dare you take possession of the very spot we had our eye on?" asked Grace as she shook hands with David. "I came over to try my bird before I have it sent home for the winter," replied David. "I was just locking up." "And the exhibition is all over," cried Grace in a disappointed tone. "I'm so sorry. You see, I still have a hankering for aeroplanes." "There wasn't any exhibition after all," said David. "It wouldn't fly worth a cent today. I shall have to give it a complete overhauling when I get it back to my workshop. What are you girls doing out this way?" "Oh, we just came out to walk because it was too nice to stay indoors," said Anne, "and now we are particularly glad we came." "Not half as glad as I am," replied David, looking at her with a smile. "Speaking of walking," remarked Hippie, "I have decided to go in for a little on my own account. Object to become a lightweight. Is there anyone who will encourage me in this laudable resolution and beguile me while I go galumphing over the ground?" "Oh, I know something that would be perfectly fine," exclaimed Nora, hopping about in excitement. "Watch her," cried Hippie. "She's about to have a conniption. She always has them when an idea hits her. I've known her for years and—" "Make him stop," appealed Nora to David and Reddy, "or I won't tell any of you a single thing." I'll desist, merely to please the Irish lady, not because I'm afraid of you two long, slim persons," said Hippie, cleverly dodging both David and Reddy. "Suppose we go on a walking expedition," said Nora. "We can start early some Saturday morning, with enough lunch to last us all day, and walk to the other side of Upton Wood and back. My sister would be glad to go with us, so that will settle the matter of having an older person along. We can have the whole day in the woods, and the walk will do us all good. We won't have many more chances either, for winter will be upon us before we know it. It's a shame to waste such perfect days as these." "What a perfectly lovely stunt!" exclaimed Grace. "We'll write to Tom Gray and see if he can't come too. The walking expedition wouldn't be complete without him." "I'll write to him tonight," said David. "I certainly should like to see the good old chap." "Will there be plenty to eat?" asked Hippy. "I always feel hungry after such strenuous exercise as walking. I'm not very strong, you know." "Hear him!" jeered Reddy. "One minute he vows to walk until he reaches the skeleton stage, and the next he threatens to kick over all his vows by overeating." "I didn't say anything about overeating," retorted Hippy. "I merely stated that there are times when I feel the pangs of hunger." "Stop squabbling," said Jessica, "and let's lay some plans." "Where shall we lay them?" innocently asked Hippy. "Nowhere, if you're not good," said Nora, eyeing him severely. And then an animated discussion began, and the following Saturday was agreed upon, the weather permitting, as the best time to go. Saturday turned out fair, and by 9 o'clock the entire party were monopolizing the Harlowe's veranda. "Well, are we all ready?" said Tom Gray, as he glanced at his watch. "Everybody scramble. 1, 2, 3, walk!" 8 highly excited boys and girls, accompanied by Miss Edith O'Malley, hustled down the steps, waving goodbye to Mrs. Harlowe as she stood on the veranda and watched them out of sight. The lunch had been divided into 4 packages, and each boy strapped a package to his shoulder. Grace wore a little knapsack fitted to her back with 2 cross straps. "There's nothing in it but some walnut fudge that I made last night, but I couldn't resist wearing it. It belonged to my grandfather," she confided to the girls when they had exclaimed over it. "My, but it's great to be here," said Tom Gray to Grace as they entered Upton Wood. "I'm so glad I could come." "So are we," she replied. A lark in the woods wouldn't be half the fun with our forester missing." "Back to nature for me every time," he exclaimed, taking a deep breath and looking about him, his face aglow with forest worship. "I love the woods too," said Grace, "almost enough to wish I were a gypsy." On down the shady wood road they traveled, sometimes stopping to watch a squirrel or a chipmunk, or to knock down a few burrs from the chestnut trees they occasionally found along the way. Once they stopped and played hide-and-seek for half an hour. By 1 o'clock they were ravenously hungry. Hippy clamored incessantly for food. "Let us feed him at once, and have peace," exclaimed Nora. "I'm hungry too. It seems an age since breakfast." A halt was made, and the contents of 2 of the lunch packages were arranged on a little tablecloth at the foot of a great oak. The hungry young folks gathered around it, and in a short time nothing remained of the lunch, excepting the packages reserved for supper. "I move we all take a half-hour's rest and then go on," said David. "We still have a mile to go before we are through the wood. We'll feel more like walking after we've rested a little." "Let us all sit in a row with our backs against this fallen tree and tell a story," said Grace. "Hippy, you are on the end, so you can begin it. Then after you have gone a little way, Nora must take up the narrative, and so on down the line until the story is finished." "Fine," said Hippy. "Here goes. Once upon a time, in the heart of a deep forest, there lived a most beautiful prince. He had all that heart could wish. Still he was not happy, for alas, he was too fat." At this statement there was a shout of laughter from his listeners, at which Hippy, pretending anger, glared ferociously and vowed that he would not continue. Nora thereupon took up the narrative and convulsed her hearers with the remedies tried by the fat prince to reduce his weight. Then the story was passed on to Anne. With each narrator it grew funnier, until the party screamed with laughter over the misfortunes of the ill-starred prince. Hippy ended the tale by marrying the hero to a princess who was a golf fiend, and who forced the poor prince to be her caddy. From the day of his marriage he chased golf balls, concluded Hippy, and the habit became so firmly fixed with him that he even rose and chased them in his sleep. He lost flesh at an alarming rate, and 3 months after his wedding day they laid him to rest in the quiet churchyard, with a touching epitaph over him. "Things are not what they seem." Hippy buried his face in his handkerchief and sobbed audibly until David and Reddy pounced upon him, and he was obliged to forego his lamentations and defend himself. "It's time to move," said Tom Gray, consulting his watch. "I don't believe we'd better go through the wood. We'll have to about face if we expect to get home before dark." So the start back was made, but their progress was slow. A dozen things beguiled them from the path. Tom's trained eye spied a wasp's nest hanging from a limb. It was as large as a Japanese lantern, and a beautiful silver-gray color. Anne stopped to pick some ground berries she found nestling under the under the leaves. Then they all started in wild pursuit of a rabbit, and in consequence had difficulty in finding the road again. Finally, they all grew so hungry they sat down and disposed of the remaining food. "How dark it is growing!" exclaimed Jessica, as they again took the road. "It must be very late." "It's after 4 o'clock," replied David, "and there's a storm coming too. I think we had better hurry. I don't fancy being caught in the woods in bad weather. Hustle, everybody." As they hurried along the path, a blast of wind blew full in their faces. The whole forest seemed suddenly astir. There were strange sounds from every direction. The branches creaked, and the dry leaves fell rattling to the ground by hundreds. Another gust of wind filled their eyes and nostrils with fine dust. "Don't be frightened," called Tom. "Follow me." He led the way with Reddy, but the storm was upon them before they had gone 10 steps. The wind almost blew them off their feet, and black darkness settled down over the woods. They could just see the outlines of the trees as they staggered on, a blinding rain drenching them to the skin. Tom divided the party into 2 sections, 4 in one and 5 in the other. They were to hold each other's hands tightly and keep together. Frequent flashes of lightning revealed the woods in a tremendous state of agitation, and it seemed better to be moving than to stand still and watch the terrifying spectacle. On they stumbled, but suddenly came to grief, for the 4 in front fell headlong over a tree that had been blown across the path, and the other 5, hearing their cries of warning too late, followed after. By the time they had picked themselves up, the storm had grown so furious that they could only press miserably together and wait for it to pass. Suddenly, Tom amazed them all by putting his hands to his mouth and blowing a strange kind of hollow whistle that sounded like the note of a trumpet. He repeated the whistle again and again. "You may not believe it," he said between calls, but the hunter who taught me this told me never to use it unless I were in dire need. Then help of some sort would surely come. It is called elf's horn." "Did you ever try it before?" asked Reddy curiously. "No," he answered. "I never did. I suppose it's only superstition, but I love hunter's lore. Perhaps it may work. Who knows?" "Hello?" cried a voice seemingly close by. "Hello?" "Where are you?" called Tom. "This way," answered the voice, and a light flashed a little distance off, revealing to them a man waving a lantern with one hand and beckoning with the other. One and all dashed toward the light, feeling that shelter was at hand. "It must be a hunter," panted Tom, "and he has heard the elf's horn." It was a hunter, and none other than old Jean. Their blind wandering had taken them straight to the hunter's cabin. "It is Mademoiselle Grace and her friends," cried the old man with delight. "When the sky grows so dark, I take my lantern and go out to my trap I have set this morning. Then I hear a strange whistle many times, and I think someone will get lost, and I cry, 'Hello?' and you answer, and I find Mademoiselle and her friends." "That was the elf's horn, Jean," replied Tom, "and you heard because you are a hunter." "I know not what monsieur mean by elf horn, but I hear a whistle anyhow, and come," remarked the old man, smiling. The others laughed. "It's a shame to spoil it," replied David, but I am afraid your elf's horn and Jean's hallowing were just a coincidence." "Coincidence or not," replied Tom good-naturedly, "my faith in the fairy horn is now unshakable. I shall use it again if I ever need to." Before a blazing fire kindled by Jean in the big fireplace, the whole party dried themselves. The old hunter listened to the story of their mad scramble through the woods with many expressions of sympathy. It was 8 o'clock when the storm had abated sufficiently to allow them to sally forth, and in a short time they were in Oakdale. 15 minutes later, they were telling Mr. and Mrs. Harlowe just how it all happened. And that is the end of Chapter 3 of Grace Harlowe's junior year at high school. Thank you for listening to this chapter with me, and I hope you return soon for the next one. Have a great day. Bye!